now wanted to ask about January 6th and beyond, what the mood is in Washington, what's going to happen in Congress, and what this means long term. Mike, what's the mood in Washington?
Well, it's I live out here in Montgomery County, which is in the suburbs of Maryland, outside of Washington. And everyone here says, don't go downtown to Washington, D.C. tomorrow on January 6th. I think it's going to be, it could conceivably be a very ugly situation, but maybe better angels will prevail, and we won't have violence. But there's a possibility that we will have a real tumultuous day tomorrow with protesters and people in the streets and a lot of things going on that are not they don't reflect what America is really about in the world. And it's astonishing to me that how much we have slipped in the category of most admired nations in the world. That is just really a sad thing to see. And I hope that somehow or other we get beyond the next couple of days and get into a different rhythm of what it means to be an exceptional nation, because that's not what we're presenting to the world right now.
Thurgood, what do you see happening in the Congress itself on January 6th?
I think it's going to be January 6th, 7th, and maybe January 8th. And it's going to be endless yakking about issues either long resolved or pointless and not fully raised because they were never properly grounded. And we're going to have to sit and listen to it and endure it. And those raising these issues have some concerns about the way in which this process plays out on the one hand, but they are misusing the design purposes of tomorrow's events to make this point in ways that are far more damaging than I think they recognize. And if they do recognize it, then their behavior is even more appalling than I think.
Well, we'll come back and ask this question later on. The last time there was an election like this to a degree was 1876, and there were reforms that came out of that. The question is, will reforms come out of this one? So I'll ask you that later, Thurgood. But Peter, over to you. What do you think of the Biden strategy in terms of basically sitting back, knowing that this is going to fail in the Congress eventually, and letting the Republicans work it out or fight it out amongst themselves?
Well, it is a strategy that gives no comfort to Democrats. Yeah, that's one thing. I mean, there's a lot of people that are very frustrated with the silence. And secondly, I don't think at the core that there are very many in the Republicans that think they can overturn the election tomorrow, Thursday, and Friday, as Thurgood said. But I do believe that their intent is to completely discredit and delegitimize this presidency, to cripple it going forward. And in that case, the silence has contributed to that. It's the old, how soon we forget about Harville and his history, that you never let a charge go unanswered. For these guys, but by the time Friday comes and Biden is and Harris are confirmed, my guess is 85% of those of Republicans will not consider his presidency legitimate. And that is a terrible indicator.
Mike, how do you see it playing out so far, and what do you think the Democrats should be doing?
Well, I'm sorry to say I have to agree with Peter on this. I just think there's just there's an enormous distrust of government, and we're going to end up in a place where 70 million people who voted for Trump feel like this is all illegitimate, and Biden is illegitimate and he shouldn't be president, and Trump actually won, and it was stolen from him. I mean, because of the narrative that they've been able to prosecute. And I don't know how you turn that around. I mean, I think the major media has tried to, sort of say, I mean, it's astonishing to me. You pick up the Washington Post, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and they say, based on absolutely, no facts at all, Trump said today, it's like, I mean, I've never seen, journalism coverage like this before, because they're basically calling him out, but they don't have that impact, because people just go to where they want to get the information that they believe is true. And I don't know how you turn that around. I don't know how you redirect a democracy in the direction of a place where we all kind of come together and have some discussion in public square where we all look for a common good, because we just don't have that now. We just have this dysfunctional, divided media, and people just go to where they want to hear what they believe, and that's kind of where we are left, and it's dangerous, and it really strikes to the heart of what is the American democracy going to be 5 years from now. Are we going to make it through this? And I am 50-50 on that. I just don't know whether we're gonna make it.
Well, Thurgood, we wrote with some optimism that out of all of this disaster and mess, that there could be some foundation for bipartisanship going forward, because of the recognition that you finally have to put country over party, and that you have to work together to get certain things done. And if the aftermath of Trump and the pandemic combined, hopefully can do that. Thurgood, what do you think?
I want to be optimistic, as we wrote, and I think there is reason to be, but I'll be watching very closely. I think part of I don't entirely disagree with what Mike and Peter have said, but I think part of the strategy that they're criticizing and that's playing out is not so much a strategy, but a recognition that what we have seen is the more that Democrats try to extract or set up a situation where Republicans that fail to do the right thing have to pay a price, that feeds into these arguments against the Democratic label. And it's a recognition in some ways that we have to continue, if we want to get through this, to count on Republicans growing a spine the way Mitt Romney has recently on these issues, and these statewide elected officials in Georgia who, despite death threats and plainly illegal calls from the president of the United States, the leader of their party, have stood up rather valiantly and with facts and the law and the moral compass as their guide. And that in many ways speaks far more volumes than anything that the Democratic leadership could do right now. Unfortunately, the price that these poor people now pay is absolutely insane and absurd. And so that's why I want to be optimistic, Steve, as we wrote, but with a healthy dose of caution.
Well, I would point out that Stacey Abrams today did identify the Secretary of State as being not quite the hero that one would think. That it was in fact his very deliberate 2-year program of voter suppression, of illegally purging voter lists, of reducing the number of polling places in voting districts of color that cost her the governorship. And so it was she was pointing out that this guy had to follow the law because it was his election, but that he had already tried to jimmy the system in favor of the GOP for 2 years.
Well, that's a fair point, Peter, and it's also a very sad commentary on how things have shifted so quickly
Pretty
in such a
sad.
short period of time, because here we are um, looking at people stepping up to the plate with some semblance of a spine, who only a year or two ago were, and in some cases months ago, were party to arguably illegal conduct. Yet they are far uh, more conscientious, law-abiding than the President of the United States.
And see, I think that's, Peter, that's what gives me hope, right? Because you have people who, when it comes down to the foundation of the country, that they'll do the right thing. And maybe they should have done the right thing before, but at least they're doing it now. And they do, I think, should get some credit for that, because it is, they could be doing the easy thing and saying, oh, well, I'm going to, we're going to recount again, or we're going to throw this, but they're not. And so it's what's given me optimism. Mike, is anything? I mean, what? Any reason for hope here?
I think you're being a little too optimistic. I mean, I just think the dysfunction that has been built into our politics and the collapse of the Republican Party that we've known, the grand old party, it just doesn't exist anymore. And it's going to be up to people to kind of reconstitute a new, middle conservative party that is rational, or they're just going to be a Trump party. And if it's a Trump party, then we're going to be in for years and years of this. And it's a pretty dispiriting outcome. And frankly, Democrats have been a little feckless in responding to that. I mean, they haven't come up with a really good way to counter that. And so, we're at a kind of a moment of truth in what does our American republic really look like? What does this little experiment in self-government look like? And are we going to make it through this or not? And it's hard to predict what the outcome of that will be. A year from now, we'll look back on this maybe and say, we made it through that. And it was, we basically were okay. Or we could just say we entered into a very dark time. And I don't know. I mean, I wake up 50-50 every morning on what the outcome of that is.
Well, Peter,
Steve, how about, let's try this. How about whether Mike or Steve would grant us perhaps a cynical interpretation that there's reason for optimism, which is that Mitch McConnell and the Republican congressional leadership might go along on some things, not so much because it's the right thing to do, but because it's the expedient thing to do to help their own cause, to no longer appear to be complete roadblocks to everything, but to give up on some things in a way that they can couch as not so much giving up, but finally stepping up and doing their jobs.
I'm going to add go ahead, Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's good. That's a good point. Like maybe they will want to look like we're more reasonable than you think, and we're not completely in the tank for this craziness. And so we're going to try to do some things that will move us forward. I mean, because there's multiple things that they could do that would actually be completely bipartisan and completely everyone would support. And if they do that, then maybe we end up in a place where people say, okay, well, we have a functional government again, and we're not totally dysfunctional. And that might be in their political interest. I think that's your point, that they'd probably be, they get some credit for that politically. So that's probably not a bad thing. That's the hopeful, optimistic view of the future.
I'm going to give Peter a question. So Peter, can a Trump party exist without Trump? And meaning, Trump's not going to be around forever. And he gets away with things. And so then other people think they can get away with things, but they can't, because Donald Trump is sui generis. And I saw, Senator Hawley being interviewed on Fox yesterday, and he got toasted by Brett Baer saying, why are you objecting? What are you hoping to accomplish from this? And Hawley couldn't answer the question. And Bear just hammered him on it. And you would never do that. They would have never done that to Trump. Trump wouldn't have, gone on with Bear either. But don't you think that the Trump party can't exist long term because Trump's the only one who can get away with this?
Well, there you go. You're hoping that that the natural order will do the heavy lifting, and that the Trump party will simply naturally disappear, and we won't have to take it on. I mean, cut it out, Steve. It's the glue that holds the Trump, movement together is Fox, Sinclair, talk radio in rural white America. That's not going away. That glue is there. It's super glue. It holds even when tens of thousands of seniors are dying around them. They don't care. So the idea that, well, we just have to wait for Trump to get more senile or to die is like, we just need to wait for Mueller. He'll squeeze the trigger on Trump, and then we won't have to do a goddamn thing. It's foolishness. Sorry.
Mike, you gonna say
I think that's a little too dark. I think there are a lot of people. I think there are a lot of people there. First of all, there are a lot of people out there who just don't pay attention to any of this stuff, and they're not glued to Fox and Sinclair, and they're not listening to Rush Limbaugh all day or whatever they listen to. And they're just like, they kind of wake up and sort of say, well, what's going on? And, that is a different question. That's a question of citizenship and awareness and how much people actually are paying attention to what's going on. But, the quantity of people who actually are riveted to all the right-wing radical media that we see is pretty small at the end of the day, just like it's probably pretty small the number of people who are riveted to, Rachel Maddow and CNN and or other stuff. I mean, the quantity of people paying attention is a small fraction of the people who actually represent the people of the United States of America. And so how do they make decisions at the end of the day, and how do they vote, and how do they make decisions? I mean, I think we have to be very careful in what we assume people really pay attention to, because I think a lot of people are so turned off, they're probably not paying attention to a lot of this stuff.
All right, so Thurgood, take us out on a high note. What's the good that comes out of the mess we're going to see in Congress this week?
Oh, this week? I'm going to pass on taking us out on a high note on this week. Every time I think this is over, I'm astonished.
Yeah, tomorrow is going to be one of the great shit shows of all time.
Yeah, right.
Well, I'm hopeful out of that there'll be some recognition. We've got to do better on the elections, and we've got to, we've got to get some semblance of trust back in our system, and people standing up for it. Even Republicans who were accused otherwise of not having the best interest at stake came up at the end. So that's my note of optimism that we're going to see coming out of this week, and that you're going to see more Republicans joining Romney as well, which I think is a good thing in terms of standing up for the Constitution. All right. Well, we'll see what happens. Yes, yeah, on a positive note. Well, we'll see what happens. All right. Thanks, guys.